Right. So when I left McKinsey, I asked my entire class, what do they think of my new job? Do they think it's interesting? Would they want to do it, etc., etc.? And about 80% of my colleagues said, wow, that's a great thing to do, and just go for it, and it's a great thing, and we totally love it. Then I asked them, if given a chance, would you do it? I think only 5% said yes. And the remaining said, no, government is slow, it's boring, it's different, and it's inefficient, it's corrupt, and we just won't do it. It's not really like business, so therefore we don't do it. Whereas my belief is actually quite the opposite. I think government is very much like a business. So that's why my talk is called the non-business of all businesses. So my belief is that government is some form of a business, but really it's not really a business, so it's a non-business, which runs all businesses. And what I believe is that businesses and governments have the same objective. Businesses want to make money. The government wants to make money as well. So businesses want to maximize their top line, they want to earn more revenues, they want to maximize their profits, their per employee earnings. Governments want to maximize the GDP, the per capita earnings, etc., etc. Businesses yearn for power, so they want to be as powerful as they want within a country, or maybe across the globe, or maybe in the sector. Governments yearn for power as well. So, for example, the USA wants to be the most powerful country in the world, so that it can dominate the trade policies, the defense policies, etc., etc. So that way the businesses and governments are again very similar. And both businesses and governments also have welfare of their people in their mind. So businesses at some level want their employees to be happy, to be well off, etc., etc. Government obviously want its citizens to be well off. So the priorities may differ, but broadly the objectives of a business, a typical business and a typical government are very, very similar. In terms of how they're organized, I again believe that businesses and governments are very similar. So businesses have profit centers and cost centers. The profit centers feed the cost centers. The cost centers, in turn, the long term, sustain the innovation, etc., in the profit centers. The government is the same. For example, the Ministry of Railways, it's making profit, so it's a profit center, whereas the Ministry of, say, Rural Development, it invests in promoting the welfare of the rural population, so that way it's a cost center. Again, businesses have verticals and horizontals. Governments have verticals and horizontals. For example, the railways is a vertical, whereas, say, a Ministry of Commerce is a horizontal. In terms of what businesses do, businesses sell. And I think governments sell as well. So, for example, India sells its IT and ITES services across the globe. So every government wants to maximize its earnings by selling its core competencies to other nations. Businesses lobby. Governments lobby as well. So, for example, India is lobbying hard in the Doha negotiations and the WTO and, for example, climate change. So businesses and governments, again, do the same thing at different scales for different people, but essentially at the core, they are the same. Yet, I think all of us would agree that governments are typically less efficient than business. And that clearly reflects in the response I got from my colleagues when I left my job. And why is that? So I often ask people why, I ask people why is that? Some people say it's because of scale, because governments are typically much larger than a typical business. So suppose this is a government and that's a business. So it's much larger, and that could cause governments to be inefficient. But even if we break a government into, say, individual components, say a small project, and we break a business into small projects, and we compare the smallest bit, even then we probably find that this small bit is inefficient as compared to that small bit in the private sector. So therefore, scale doesn't really answer everything. So we go to the structural reasons. So obviously, governments have some obligations because of which it cannot be as efficient as a typical business. For example, ownership. Government is ultimately owned by people, so it's not really owned by a single individual who can decide on behalf of everybody and can make the most optimal choices. Government, a big mandate is equality, so therefore it cannot really place money and efficiency before the welfare of everybody. It has to take everybody together. And the sources of resources are ultimately the people, so therefore government can't really say that, okay, I will make a policy which affects the section of the people who are the most efficient and who bring back some money for the country, because the tax which the government collects is from everybody, not just the most efficient people. So that's the other reason why government is structurally different from businesses, and that's why it cannot be as efficient. The problem is that there are lots of unavoidable reasons, lots of actually avoidable reasons, which are hidden under the garb of structural reasons. Which people say that, okay, this is the government, यहाँ पर ऐसा नहीं होता है, and therefore it will be slow. For example, suboptimal incentive system, which people typically talk of. Then legacy issues, things which have been going on for years, which people say, this can't be changed, and this is the government, and we just can't help it. Then people complain of politics. There's too much politics, and what can I do as an individual to change stuff? Then lack of accountability. So there are various things which are not really structural, which can be changed, but which are often hidden under the cover of structural reasons. And I believe that if we can avoid these avoidable efficiencies, then governments can at least compare or at least try to be as efficient as good, efficient businesses. Actually, I'll come to this later. Just go to this graph first. So if you try to do a rough plot between efficiency of a system, of an organization, versus the structural constraints it has, so obviously the more constraints you have, the less efficient you'll probably tend to be. So a government typically would be probably somewhere there in the blue blob, where the structural constraints are high and therefore the efficiency is low. But if you avoid the avoidable efficiencies, then you can just move up. So at the same level of structural constraints, you can probably compare to a business which has less structural constraint. So therefore the objective which I had in mind, and which many people who have interacted with in the government have in mind, is to avoid the avoidable reasons and move up the efficiency ladder. I think these things would not be really news for anybody out here who has lived in India. So if you go and ask people in the government, okay, I have this work to do, and can you do it? People will typically say, okay, it's definitely doable, but I won't do it. Why should I do it? Some people will say, okay, what is in it for me if I complete this work, if you know what I mean. Some people say that, okay, the rule book says that 16 signatures are required to get this clearance. Although they are not really required, I think that 2 are sufficient, but the rule book says 16, so it has to be 16. Some people say that, okay, if I have this idea, I can do it for you, but if I innovate, my sahib will get angry. Some say, okay, Mantriji is corrupt, so I'll be corrupt and I'll just follow my boss. Some people will say that if I give an opinion, if I do the job faster for you, people will think that I have a personal interest. So therefore, all intentions right, he just won't do it to just safeguard himself. Now, amidst all these challenges, all these structural and non-structural inefficiencies, it's quite scary, and that's I think one reason why people I know shy away from working with the governments. Communication is a big area which is typically very poor in governments. So things move on files. People don't use email. For example, when I worked with a government, on the first day I sent an email to somebody saying that, hi, I've joined and I want this information, and can you please get back to me? And I was sort of hesitant to say, okay, this guy may not be conversant with emails, and probably his assistant would open the email after 2 days, and then he will inform him, and then he'll come back to me after 5 days. But what happened was that his assistant was on holiday, so he checked the email after 3 days, takes a printout, puts a stamp, signs on the email, that printout, gives it to his boss. The boss signs, puts his stamp, sends it to his team in a file. The team compiles the information, sends back to his boss. The boss writes a cover note saying that, dear Mr. Prateek Singhal, this is a reference to your email dated so-and-so on so-and-so time, and here's the information for your kind perusal. And puts it in a file, and file comes back to me after 2 weeks. And that's just a reply to one simple email. And that's the way systems could be. So things which people have tried, actually are trying in the recent past and currently is, first thing is e-government, which is basically you deliver services to citizens online. And that forces you to be fast, to have SLAs, to actually perform up to people's expectations. Because when everything is online, you don't really have the excuse of things moving on file or things being slow, things moving on paper. The second thing which actually the UK government has done is something called transformational government, in which they say that we will keep pace with the latest cutting-edge technologies when it comes to interfacing with people or vendors or any stakeholders. So for example, they would use things like podcasts or mobile devices and all those cutting edge things which any other business would use to give their services. And so that's, I would still say that is the easy path. So to have an online interface, automated interface is still easy, but governments have actually moved on to paperless offices where You have an online interface to interact with your stakeholders, but everything inside the government is also automated. So you don't use paper at all. So everybody knows how to use computers, all the processes are automated, everything is computerized. And that's one way of sort of bring about the change of trying to move things. The second lever is to change the management practices, to bring about reforms in management. So what President Obama has done is that he has created a SWAT team in which he has called people from the corporate sector to work with him across all departments, all ministries. I don't know what the correct word in the US system is. And these two people head the SWAT team. So Jeff Zients is the Chief Performance Officer. Vivek is the Chief Information Officer, and Anish is the Chief Technology Officer. So as you can see that at least from the names and the structure of the team, it sounds very, very forward-looking and sounds very much like a typical corporate setup. And it just goes to show that governments also can bring about that reform, can be as efficient, can follow the best practices from the corporate sector to improve themselves. And this SWAT team, one of its agendas is technology, innovation, and government reform. So it goes across all ministries, sort of monitors them, tells them what their weak points are, what their inefficiencies are, what they should do, and then also counsels them, advises them, monitors them, holds reviews, etc., etc. And one of the things which they have provided is this dashboard, which is available online for anybody in the country, in fact in the world, to see. So where they have the list of all their departments, they have certain measurement indicators which show how the performance of this department is, and any citizen can go and see, the Department of Healthcare and Human Services is red on this one parameter, and it's yellow on this parameter, and green on this parameter. So everybody knows how my government is working. At the same time, this department is also accountable, because once it's out in the public that, okay, I am not doing well on this one particular count, then that secretary will obviously go back and try to improve that because it shows up online. So that's just one way of creating that framework which forces people to improve themselves. Now this is what happened in the US. Something similar happened in India as well. So India Post, the Department of Posts, it's a 150-year-old department. It's a fairly low priority department for the government, so no government ever paid any heed to improving anything in that. And the department was completely manual, not automated. People were just stagnant. There was no notion of innovation or improvement or good service, etc., etc. So a new minister took charge and he formed a core team, saying that, okay, I want to improve the postal department. Now what he did was, first of all, he, along with this core team, went to different post offices. So he went to the villages and talked to the postmasters and the circle heads and the post office staff and the postmen to say, okay, we want to improve your one post office. Forget about the entire network, because the entire network is huge. So India, for example, has, I think, 144,000 post offices. The entire network is huge, and you can't improve the entire thing at one go. But he said, okay, I want to improve your one post office, and what should I do? And people gave him ideas. Then his team came back to him, and the teams sat down, sort of concretized the ideas, put together a document. And then the other thing which the minister did was he put in place a video conferencing system where he could talk to all 22 states, in fact 25 states in the country at one shot. Now in a system where people respond to emails by sending data on files, I think this was a really, really magnanimous move. And the third thing he did was for each post office he defined certain performance parameters to say, okay, you know what to do, you have told us, and we have given that document to you. So you go ahead, implement those initiatives, we'll monitor you, and let's see where we go. So now this is the kind of dashboard which the minister got, which he used to review his states. So this may not be visible to some of you, but if I can just read out. So for example, a state like Madhya Pradesh, the minister would just go and say, okay, there's a red boundary in that part of the dashboard, and he'll just go to this line and say, okay, percentage mail not delivered same day in the registered items category is 10.5%, and that's not really done. I mean, out of every 100 mails which is sent to you, you don't send 10 mails out of that to the customer, and which is really wrong. So he'll open the video conferencing setup. He'll just ask the circle head of Madhya Pradesh to say, okay, hey, what's going on? And then that person will go back to his state dashboard and say, okay, Madhya Pradesh, here are my post offices. there's something red there. So he'll see, okay, Lashkar head office didn't deliver 11% of the registered articles on that one day. And that's how, sitting in Delhi, the core team and everybody who can make that change knows where things go wrong. And there's this constant sense of monitoring that, you know, you're being watched, and, you know, you just can't do something wrong and get away with it, which is there in the system. And that really helped us to improve the mail delivery performance from, so when we came in, it was about 70% mails were being delivered on time. And within, I think, 5 months' time, we were able to move it to 96%. So it just shows that, you know, with simple initiatives, you can really fix the basics. I'm not saying that this is all, and, you know, things like these will change the government, but what I call things of these kind is a second TED, which is use technology to create energy in the system, which will at least create some displacement. And I think once you combine these initiatives, which are called TED initiatives, with the obvious thing, which are, you know, large-scale reforms in the government, I think that's what leads to a transformed government, and that's what we're trying to do.